Hey, good morning. It's Pastor Doug. We're here doing our study of none of these diseases. I know it seems like it's been forever. We're now up into the 21st chapter from this good study from 1963. Even back then, they had just sold so many of these books. A lot of people wanting to know what the Bible could say to help them in a practical way. But of course, it only works if you put His Word into practice. And this not the last chapter, but this chapter is the number one health problem. If someone were going to ask you today what the number one health problem might be, you might say COVID-19. That seems to be the number one health problem. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't other problems, lots of things going on. There have been a number of people that we've been ministering to this week who have found themselves in the hospital or in urgent care, haven't been feeling well. All those things are still going on. There are still terminal diseases that people get, that people are suffering from and grieving from. Those things are still happening. But back then, number one health problem, at least according to our good Dr. S.I. McMillan, was mental health. Now, that could probably cover all kinds of things, but he said 9 million Americans back then, which was a good percentage, suffer from both emotional and mental illness. He said as many hospitals are occupied by those with mental illnesses as patients with physical illnesses. I know we have a different system now, not under the same weight of care for patients that they were back then. They were still developing a lot of the means for helping people with mental illnesses, still growing and developing as we are today in our understanding of it. But he said, at least back then, 1 out of 20, think about that, so 1/20th, 1 out of 20 Americans will have a psychotic disturbance severe enough to confine them in a hospital for the insane. Now, we wouldn't use the word insane today, but you know the kind of thing I'm talking about. Not just having a blow up, not just having a meltdown, not just needing to go for a walk or take a run or whatever it is you do to calm yourself down, but being so mentally unstable that either yourself or someone has to admit you into an inpatient care facility. The cost of taking care of these mentally unstable, mentally ill patients back then, he estimated as $1 billion for inpatient care. And he said there just wasn't a lot of outpatient care back then. And so there was a huge cost to the economy in welfare for those who are incapable of caring for themselves. It was burgeoning into the homelessness where we still see a lot of it today. It was overflowing in the care units they did have to the point that they were wanting to move people out to be able to have room for those with more severe cases, which they've done and which has grown our homeless population. Imprisonment, a lot of them end up in prison because they do things that are wrong, whether they understand it or not, because of their mental illness, their insanity in that sense. They get put into prison. Shelters and ministries reaching out to them are full of care for a majority of these people who are not well. Disturbances in which visible changes in the brain can be detected is the kind of definition which is going to be looked at in this chapter. At least that's what we're told would be looked at in this chapter. And those changes might be the result from an injury, say an accident. I had a brother who was in a severe accident that he was determined brain dead at the scene of the accident. He did recover from that, but he had some severe mental illnesses, the inability to remember anything at all. He had only short-time memory, only a little bit of it. It did grow over his recovery, but he always suffered with mental problems, and that's eventually what led to his death. Infections. We can have infections that limit our ability to think in healthy ways, can react with us in ways in which we are not ourselves, and we do exhibit those mental illnesses because of the infection. the introduction of toxins into our body, which prohibit our minds from functioning as they should. Um, they're what I would call naturally occurring diseases, and particularly back then, primarily syphilis was being spread. And one of the things it did was affect the brain and prevented people from thinking as they should. There's also behaviorally induced diseases, and primarily drug or alcoholism. We call them addictions today, or talk about alcoholism as a disease, but it's one that someone has chosen, someone has gone to. They may have been directed or guided or indicated, but it's a behaviorally induced disease. At least back then, 10% of all admissions in mental hospitals were officially reported as due to alcoholism. Another 10% have alcoholism of considerable degree reported as an important contributing factor. If you've been around people, you know alcohol affects the way they think. It can do so momentarily if you drink too much, but over a long time in which your body becomes dependent on it, it can actually change the chemistry, change the way the mind functions, to the point that they're mentally ill. It is a disease. They can't be healthy because of the way they've damaged themselves with that alcohol. There are developmental disorders in the normal process of growth and development. There are some people who do not develop in a healthy way, and they end up with various mental handicaps, we would call them. And some of those can be from the severe to very mild. Osteoarthritis of the cerebral arteries, choking them down, hardening of them, which comes both from hereditary, but also, as we learned in some earlier studies, eating fat, overeating, smoking, stress. And probably the number one issue that brings about mental illness, at least back then, I'm not going to say anything today because I'm approaching this, is getting old, aging. Some, as they get older, suffer from a variety of dynamics in their lives over a long period of time, and they're no longer able to think like they were. And because they can't think like they used to, not just forgetting things, not the sort of the normal problems of thinking as you age, but to the point that it exhibits what we would call a mental illness or a mental disease or a mental handicap. Some of them even to the severity of the point that you might call them insane. Some of them just act in impossible ways that drive other people crazy. Sometimes those old people just start acting in a way that is not okay. They move from childhood tantrums to those teenage assertivenesses, to those middle-age orneriness, and develop a thorny and sour and crabby disposition in their old age. And at least according to this chapter, it's seen as a mental illness of age, and not being prepared and living right so that you would, age well. Very often our older people, because of the decline in their physical abilities, end up essentially feeling trapped with their bodies. They're not able to move like they used to. Some of them are even confined to chairs or beds, often putting them around the same people, around same caregivers who are looking after them for lengthy times. And because of their aches and their pains, and because of that mental decline, they are critical and frustrated and rather stormy in their outbursts. And they, because of this mental illness, because that's the chapter we're looking at, really put off the people around them, people who care about them. And the sad and unfortunate thing is it's probably not how they were when they were younger, but now that they're older and they're exhibiting these problems mentally, that's where they are because of this disease that they now have as a result of simply getting older and not aging well in that sense. He quotes someone, a young couple that came in, it was the mom, the wife, and she said, "Doctor, you just got to help me. I I need help. I'm going to go crazy. You got to help me do something with my mom. I simply can't take it anymore. She has us up most of the time, can't sleep at night. My husband only got a half hour of sleep last night, then he had to go to work. And here I am, here I find myself on edge. I'm yelling at my children. Now they get upset all the time. After those years of having my mother here, it's finally welled up on us. I'm completely worn out. We can't keep this up anymore. Not even the sleeping pills that you gave us to help her are working, and she's declining. We're wore out. You've just got to do something to help us. Well, they had mom at their house because she wasn't able to go to the nursing home. Hospitals and nursing homes don't want troublesome patients because they disturb everyone else. I've known some people, because of their age and their declining health, they became rather irritable, ornery people, prickly, and it was sort of a decline in their mental ability. We don't like to say that they're having mental health issues, but that's what it is. And they're disrupting the people around them, and a lot of these institutions say, you just need to keep these people at home and you take care of them. And it is difficult for those families. The relatives are loath, put them in a mental institution, and they're not serious enough to put them to an asylum. And there's also that guilt. What do you do with them? How do you care for them? I don't want to give you the wrong impression about old age, because not everybody ends up with a mental illness just because they're getting older. There are a lot of people who are jewels, godly people whose examples we aspire to. He shares in the book about a man that he knew who, even in his 90s, was one of the grandest men he had ever known. Throughout the years that he knew him, he was always a person who displayed kindness and cheerfulness and consideration. Of course, he had a few faults, and no one's perfect, but by and large, he was a really good guy. He was a man who was in ministry, and he didn't retire until he was 92 years young. I might retire before then, but you never know. He was there for a long time. But the people in the church didn't mind. He had more vision and vigor than people 30, 40 years younger than himself. And so he just continued healthily along until he got to the point that he could no longer be able to serve like he needed to serve. And so he retired. And then it wasn't long after that his health did decline. He began to have little strokes, began to affect him mentally. He had a severe stroke that then really did take its toll on him. He was unable to really swallow or speak, and finally not even eat. And so he was going in and out of consciousness. He was ready to go, but his family was not ready to let him do so, at least without a fight. So they put in the feeding tube, and he sensed what they were doing. He happened to gain consciousness briefly while the doctor was with him, and he told him, I think it would be better if you would just let me go home and be with the Lord. An attitude that doesn't see death as an end or to be dreaded, but another passage as we move to be with the Lord in that promised hope of heaven. A day or two later, he was summoned up the strength that he had to sort of raise his hand and sort of wave to his family who were around him, taking turns being with him. For the one that was there, they said it was as if he was getting his strength together to wave goodbye. See you later. See you on the other side. And that was the last communication he had with his family. And he went to the Lord peacefully. It was mean that his body didn't struggle. His wife lasted another 6 years. She continued to live with her children. She was badly crippled, confined to her chair, but she was happy and she was cheerful. She didn't suffer from those mental disorders that often take other people in a less or better direction. She always Um, Told people when they brought something to her that it looked good. She was always thankful for whatever it was, always complimentary, always trying to find something to engage them or to see who they were and what they were doing and how they were doing. Both of this husband and wife lived out their faith well. The doctor says, why didn't they suffer with this mental illness that so many end up with? And he says it because he believes that they enjoyed good health because they followed God's directives regarding his ways throughout their entire life. Their attitude was an example to everyone who encountered them, wanting to know how they could be like that. Saying, you know, when I get old, I want to be like these guys. I'm sure you have met some that way too. Around here at our church, think of Lucy Thomas. What a beautiful lady. And her spirit and her gentleness, even in her last years as she suffered, was an inspiration. I would go to her bedside and she would tell me how she was making a witness to and praying for her in-home care nurses when they would come to show up. And she wanted to let me know that even at those last days, she was working and she was praying. And she is one of many. At my previous ministry in Artesia, there was a man that was suffering a little earlier in his life. But same way, in his last and dying years, as he had people coming in taking care of him, he wanted to know, when he shared with me, wanted me to know that he was sharing his faith. He said, I want you to, this guy that comes in is taking care of me. He's not a Christian, but I'm sharing with him and he's listening. And so, Doug, you make sure you talk with him and follow up with that, because, you know, I want him to know the Lord and have this same sense of going on to be with the Lord. I think he needs that. What a beautiful witness. His wife went on to retire from her school teaching job and went to Haiti and has been there in a ministry working with the missionaries' children and with the people in Haiti. She's still there serving in that way. Beautiful people who've had years of service, faithfully serving God, and their attitudes in their old age as good, because they don't have the same mental decline, because they're not suffering from the same diseases. And that's sort of the theme of this book, if you haven't picked up on it. And that doesn't mean that you can't catch a disease that gives you a mental illness like the Alzheimer's, was such a awful disease for those people who are bright and brilliant. And with that disease, mentally, their ability to know their surroundings or know the people around him is gone. We have some people in our family who've suffered with that. But it's also, there's a pleasantness in seeing them that even with that disease, they are good and they are nice and they're considerate with the people around them. And in fact, those who are caring for them in a facility are saying we love being around them, because not everyone is that way in that. There's little wonder why these saints exhibit a life that is a model for those who say, hey, I don't know what's going to happen when I get older. I don't know the mental capacity or the diseases I might be inflicted with, but my hope is to be like one of those. So the Bible tells us this in Psalms 34:11-14. Come then to me, my sons, and I will teach you true religion. 'Tis your desire to live a long life and to be happy. Then keep your tongue from evil. True religion. Keep your tongue from evil. Keep your lips from deceit. Shun evil and do good and seek to be friendly. Aim for that. Man, often when I hear true religion, because it's mentioned in the Bible, is of ministering to widows and orphans. But here's a part of that true religion about caring for yourself, that you might love others as you love yourself. So there you have it. Be friendly, act toward others, avoid evil, and let the Lord's light shine in your life. There are thousands of people today whose lives could be so much better if they had embraced the scriptural truth and put them into practice, so at the end of their lives they might still be blessed because of God's hand in their life and his promise of none of these diseases. I hope that you don't live out your last days trapped in a nursing home throwing tantrums and being the terror of everyone and people wanting to avoid you. I hope you're that person that people see and say, I'm amazed at their attitude and their love. They've got to be hurting, but they're wanting to know about me. In fact, I feel better when I go and visit them than when I showed up. They were a blessing. I hope that you are that kind of person too, that God might bless us all to be a blessing to others. Hope that you've enjoyed our study for the day and looking at none of these diseases. May God bless you.